My mother and father actually met at dances at the Pavilion.
My family's lived here since the late 1800s.
I grew up in Island Heights in the 1960s.
I have spent every summer of my life in Island Heights since 1927.
The question of why John Frederick Peter moved to Island Heights is a big open question.
Growing up in Island Heights, it was a, I want to say, simpler time.
What's amazing to me about this town is how it's changed and it has not changed.
It was a very strict Methodist town.
Island Heights was developed during the Victorian era.
The firemen themselves actually built the new firehouse.
Everybody knew everybody. We rode all over town, and so many people were related. I mean, almost everybody.
You walk along the street and somebody's honking a horn to wave at you.
When the weather got nice, we rode our bicycles all over town.
Yeah, we usually ride our bikes. We have a park that we usually go to.
But living in Island Heights and growing up here really shows you what a great sense of community and family we have in this town.
This town was founded in 1781. Somewhere around, I think it's 1700s.
Okay.
1684. 1989.
Okay.
1980. Wait, no, 1975.
Okay.
I would ask Tim Cagney. The town was founded in 1935. 1979.
Okay.
Island Heights was founded in 1908. Okay. I don't know anything about history. No.
1878.
Damn!
Well, the town was here for a while. The church came down the end of the 1800s, but the town was probably here in the 1700s.
The history of the town before the Methodists bought in 1878, there were several large farms. One was on Oak Avenue. That's one of the original farmhouses. The other one was down on West Dray. There was a farmhouse down there. And there was the Irons Farm that was out on Central Avenue. Those are three longtime farms. They purchased the farmhouse on this side and some additional land that they were able to acquire. The house that we're in here was built in 1878. It was the 10th house built in town.
Island Heights was developed during the Victorian era. Queen Victoria was alive, and that architecture was the prominent way to build.
It was a very strict Methodist town. Almost all the houses, the deeds said no alcohol on the premises.
If they found liquor on the premises, they could confiscate your house.
When I was growing up, and all of us, our parents weren't allowed to have any liquor, but they used to make home brew. And that, because I remember Dad made it in a big crock, and then he bottled it and put it underneath the sink and every once in a while you hear a pop, and it'd go flying off.
I know this one house, I guess they drank a lot there. They took the whiskey bottles were in the wall. It was a plastered house, and it was balloon framing, and it was all open on the top. and they dropped the bottles down there. And I had to renovate the place. I think it was a kitchen and bathroom we were doing here. We opened the walls up, and all these bottles and everything were there. We had to take them to the dump.
In the early history of the town, when the Methodists founded it, it was supposed to be a camp meeting ground with a religious basis, but an awful lot of Philadelphians began to buy homes down here because the association started a real estate development.
We always heard that it was originally Johnson's Island and then Dillon's Island and eventually Island Heights.
Simpson Avenue to West End was the original town, the original development, and it was subdivided into 25-foot lots. And you were able to buy, if you wanted, you could buy 4 lots. A lot of the houses along the river, like across from the yacht club, were all 75-foot lots. Very quickly, and this is before automobiles, the railroad saw that there would be a market here. And so they built the railroad from Camden to Toms River to Island Heights to Seaside to New York.
I believe that the Island Heights ministers were influential in asking the railroad company to put a spur across the river to Island Heights.
The train originally was covering the other side of the river, and then what was built into Island Heights was just an extension, but it was only a one-way extension. You had to actually back into Island Heights.
A lot of people came because of the train. There were thousands of people down here.
That railroad bridge helped the town grow considerably.
The train was the king, and that's what got Island Heights its birth, really, was the way that people could get here.
My grandfather was the bridge tender on the railroad bridge, and I think they dismantled this bridge across the Toms River sometime in the 30s. And then he was the bridge tender on the Bay Bridge, the railroad bridge that went from like Ocean Gate to Seaside. And he actually died on that bridge. He was working a midnight shift and he fell off the bridge and he hit his head and it was killed on that bridge.
My mother's cousin was one of the first porters at the railroad station, and that was his job, to move all the goods that were coming into town, and deliver them to people's houses for the summer people.
There was a lot of people talked about the railroad and the station house. Well, a lot of people don't know what happened to it. I know where it's at. Right there.
That's the station house?
Tom Wallace got the contract to tear the station down. Dad worked for Tom, so Dad took all the wood and the big timbers and brought it home, because we only had a kitchen and a bedroom, because that's all that he could build. So then Mom and I went out in the yard and pounded the nails out and straightened them out, and Dad used those nails and all the wood to build that house.
There were a lot of summer houses that were not occupied until only in the summer. So the town wasn't very big. When I graduated from 8th grade, I was in one of the largest graduating classes, and there were 13 of us. Many years there were 2, 4 that graduated from 8th grade.
Most people don't realize really how old Island Heights is. If you look at some of the old pictures, you'll see that all the roads were dirt roads, and you can see the wagon tracks, and very often you'll see a horse and buggy or like a farm wagon.
When I was a child, not many people owned cars, and very few women drove.
The town was quiet, it was nice, and I don't think he could have had it any nicer. I was born in 1923 at 6 o'clock on Saturday night, and it snowed. And I've been here my whole life and couldn't get that beach sand out of my toes.
I think growing up in Island Heights, it was a, I want to say, simpler time. We actually had Cub Scouts in Rodney's basement. Mrs. Wilbur was our Cub Scout leader. We had Boy Scouts in the old firehouse. I mean, growing up in town, I mean, you were always outside. You could go any place in town you wanted to. You basically had the whole town to play in, whether we were playing baseball or football, or we could play in the street. Rarely did we play at the ball field.
So on the western corner of Central, there was a place called Randy's, and they had 30 pinball machines in there, and we all used to play pinball. It was a really great place for kids in town to hang out. Growing up as kids, we used to have our own town dump. And of course, when you're a young kid under 10 years old, going to the town dump was a great place to find old wood. We'd find the old wood, and then we'd go take it to the bluffs, and we'd build forts. We'd dig into the bluffs, and we'd build forts. We had a tire swing that we had out over the bluffs, probably right around where Debbie Brick's house is now.
I grew up in Island Heights in the 1960s. When I was a kid, especially in the summertime, we used to just live at the beach. You'd go down there first thing in the morning, and you'd stay down the beach until it was dinner time. Usually we went to Public Dock, and at the end of the pier, on the left-hand side, there was a diving board. So we used to go on the diving board. I remember when on 4th of July, the fire company would light off the fireworks at the end of that pier. And they built a big plywood box, and they filled it with sand and put the mortar tubes in the sand. And then at the end of the fireworks the next day, they took the box apart, and it was just clean mason sand, so they just shoveled it into the river. And then for a few days after that, you could jump off the deep end of the dock, and you could stand there, you know, and we thought that was something cool, you know, because it only lasted a couple days, and then the sand would go away.
Well, this was like an ideal place to grow up. You know, we were all in our own, you know, community, and everybody knew everybody, and there was a lot of kids in town. It was a lot of fun. You know, we all hung out at Long Point, played on the raft. We actually, there wasn't a day that went by that we didn't get down there if it wasn't raining. We lived in the water.
In order to get to the beach, you had to walk past this old holly tree that always would shed its leaves. Of course, we were all barefoot back in the 60s, and you'd have to walk over those holly leaves. Ironically, today, that holly bush is still there.
There was a building, it's still there, it was called the Comfort Station. I love the name, it was the Comfort Station. And you walked up there and it had bathrooms and a reading room. So you could go to the bathroom there.
In the summers, we had used to have 3 great beaches. Always went to Long Point or Summit Avenue Beach. It's Long Point used to have a raft you could swim out to. Public Dock had a diving board. And they're great beaches. The town maintained them, which they don't do anymore. So we got one kind of crummy beach left.
The only time I would go would be to go seine crabbing.
Well, it was a different town than it is now. We used to go crabbing, go for softies through the people's backyards, and nobody said anything. Today they call the police.
My great-grandson, one day he said to me, "My Mom," he said, "did you watch TV when you were a young person?" I said, "Honey, TV wasn't even invented yet." When the weather got nice, we rode our bicycles all over town, roller skated, And I said, we had a good time. But he said, that didn't sound like fun. I said, but it was.
When you say, what did you do? Whenever I had nothing else to do, I went rowing. I'm named after the rowboat. The rowboat was named Dot. When it was in the water, it looked half sunk, and everybody ridiculed me, except men and girls could not beat me. You go like this with that boat, and you're halfway across the river.
The Island Heights Yacht Club was founded in 1898, and the founder, among others, was a guy named Atkinson. He was the comptroller of a small company in Camden called RCA Victor. Another guy was a guy named J. Hampton Moore, who was the mayor of Philadelphia, who also had a summer house in Island Heights. These were all pretty wealthy downtown Philadelphians that built their summer houses down here. They built a yacht club, founded in 1898, built a clubhouse in 1900, and then put an addition on it in 1903, which is the building you see now.
Between the yacht club and the boardwalk, people tied rowboats. That's before that cement bulkhead. Nobody wanted that. That was Roosevelt's idea of employing people, and that was a WPA project.
As a kid, I used to take a rowboat and go underneath the club and fish, and get sunfish and white perch and striped perch. And you had to be very careful though under there, because in those days they didn't have the facilities that you now have. If you look in the gear locker over there where the Commodore's desk is, you'll see a hole in the floor. And you had to make sure you didn't go under that hole in the rowboat. Otherwise, you were liable to get doused. That was the urinal.
The Island Heights Clubhouse was built on pilings. As boating evolved, they had lighter boats that needed to be taken out of the water. So Dr. Fred Slack Jr., my father, decided with his yacht club team to bulkhead the outside of the yacht club, and that bulkheading exists today, and they filled it in, and that became the dry storage for boats that's there today.
We used to race 6 days a week. We raced Tuesday and Wednesday at Island Heights, Thursday at Beechwood, Friday, Monday Island, Saturday on the bay, Sunday back at Island Heights for the whatever series. Mondays we scrubbed the bottom of the boat.
Kids were really into helping out with the boats. They started out with the Diamond, which was a fun boat, but one heck of a lot of work. And I guess all of the mothers and dads had quite a time with the Diamonds, because you had to take them down to the wood every year, sand them, caulk them, and paint them. And Debbie decided one year, what she wanted to do was paint HELP on the bottom of hers. So when she turned over, the big red letters HELP showed above the waterline.
That's great. These diamonds that the Pride built were really something. You never were quite sure which side to measure. There was always a difference in the size. When they eventually went up to Beaton to build the boats, Beaton wanted to know which side we wanted to take for the measurements. So we told her to take an average. But your father or grandfather was instrumental in the Perrine deal. And we had that fleet till the time they got into multiple classes.
Most of the clubs were closed during the war, but the BBYRA still had races. We, with our snipes at Island Heights, would start out at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, and we sailed to Bay Head. No patrol boats, no life jackets. Under the deck, we would have our foul weather gear and our bottle of water and our lunch. And then what was worse was, in the morning you usually get a calm west wind, but you never know what's going to happen in the afternoon. And tacking back all afternoon, many a time I did not get home till 8 o'clock at night. And my grandfather would always be on the dock.
Well, the Island Heights Yacht Club is a gem among the yacht clubs, in my opinion. It's more of a family feeling. It was primarily a family club. It always has been. I hope it always will be. But generation after generation, for instance, the Haddon family is one of them. The Slack family is another one. But they seem to come back. And the children come back, and their children come back, and it's a continuous membership of the same family train.
When it snowed, the first day, everybody, you got your sled right away and headed for the Boatyard Hill. I can remember, I'm almost sure one time the fire company actually came and sprayed water on the hill, and they just closed the road off completely, altogether. If school was canceled, that's where you'd be all day, you know what I mean? You would just spend the day sledding, going up and down that hill.
What the borough used to do, when we used to have some heavy snowstorms, they'd close the streets. Like Central was one right up there where all the stores were, they'd close it, and we could sled ride. God, you go down that hill and around, you'd almost get to the yacht club.
Where the boardwalk is by the pavilion, we built snowbank so that the sled would go over and out on the ice. And young Harvey Stanwood, he owned this big sled. Well, it would hold 6, so we had maybe 9. So we told him, when you get down to the corner, veer over to the right, because you'll hit the ramp. Well, he didn't. We hit the boardwalk. The sled stayed still, arms, bodies, and legs kept going. We ended up on the part of the beach and the ice, but that was fun.
I remember when I was a kid, it seemed like we got more snow. And it seemed like, it was deeper, but maybe it was because we were, when you got a foot of snow, it was up to your waist, I think that could be part of it.
If it was 30 outside, it was 30 inside our house.
Bitter cold. I mean, the weather's nothing nowadays like it was then.
We'd ice skate all winter long. I mean, it always seems like the winters were colder. We had a lot of ice, played hockey, could sleigh ride. They used to close Simpson Avenue for sledding. Used to close the Boatyard Hill for sledding.
I remember when it got real cold, we would ice skate on those ponds behind the school on Lake Avenue there. I remember ice skating on those ponds, and they would sometimes would even build a fire like on the ice. And, yeah.
fire trucks coming around on the Christmas parade, and the fire trucks will come around, and sometimes they throw candy canes off the trucks, and sometimes someone will come off the truck and give them to you, and they usually have Santa.
Santa Claus goes on the fire truck, and we go down every street in town. We pull up to a house, and every guy, if they're right here, guys will jump off the truck and run to every house and leave them candy canes.
And what do the guys get in return?
Oh, sometimes they might get a six-pack or a bottle of wine. Not too often, though.
The school put on a play at the firehouse for Christmas. But then the firemen afterwards would bring Santa Claus in.
And they gave you a box of candy and the biggest orange you ever, I've never seen oranges like they used to give us when we were kids. They were huge. I don't know where they got them from. But it was kind of fun. It was special. You know, you remember that. When you were a little kid, you remember that kind of stuff.
And then we got a bag or a box of hard candy, an orange, and an apple from the fire company. And we thought that was great.
Do you remember what?
Because we didn't get anything. It was during Depression. You didn't ask for anything because you knew your parents couldn't give it to you. So it's like I said, we were all lucky if we got new bedroom slippers, new PJs, and a robe.
When I was a kid, businesses in town, there was the deli on the corner where the print shop used to be. That was Kelly's. You had Sid and Sindle's Boat Works halfway down the road. You had a laundromat across the street. You had the candy store on the corner.
My father had a barber shop on Central Avenue, and across the street they were building small sailboats. And, you know, my father would go over there and hang out with those guys and help him out when he wasn't cutting hair on slow times, which was most of the time.
Did he not cut the town's hair? Was he not the...
Well, you know, if you remember what happened in the 60s, long hair came into vogue and a lot of people didn't get their hair cut, me included.
And Ernie Wilbur there had a barber shop. The only thing is you didn't want to be in there if the fire whistle blew. If he had half your hair cut, you had to wait till he came back.
When I was a child, we had the milkman and we had a bread man. And, you know, in the summertime, you had somebody who came around with vegetables and stuff. And there was an ice truck.
We had ice delivered, I believe, either 2 or 3 times a week by Mr. Charlie Johnson. He had a big family. Eventually, a lot of the Yetman family, he was their grandfather. And Harry Schlussman was his grandson and worked with him on the truck.
My grandfather was the iceman in Island Heights for many, many, many years. All of his sons, son-in-laws, nephews, grandchildren, all worked on the ice wagon.
In the old days, they'd cut big blocks of ice out of the river, you know, 3 by 5. I mean, and then stack them up in an ice house, which was partially underground, and I mean, they'd keep ice for 6 months with no refrigeration.
When my mother was a little girl, she had a wagon, and she used to deliver 10-cent pieces of ice down to the boarding house. There was a boarding house or hotel at the bottom of Central Avenue, and she would get to take these 10-cent pieces of ice up and deliver them.
McCaig, that was a general store, like way back a number of years, I think back in the 20s or 30s. You know, they sold tools. They still had some stuff like that. I can remember going in there. But they had meat, bread, milk.
We all knew George McCaig, Uncle George, who was such a figure in town and so respected.
He was a sweetheart. In the wintertime, all the older men, like my grandfather and all the other men, they gather around the big coal stove and just sit there and talk about fishing and all that stuff.
Where the people hung out, the men in town, that was Vierik's ice cream store. During the summer, all the older men went down and they hung out in his store.
There was a legend, an urban legend, that a lion had once lived in the basement. We weren't sure whether it was still there or not.
In those days, if you had a soda bottle, you got 2 cents deposit. So I would, when I was bored, go through everybody's trash. When I wasn't picking their flowers, which they hated me for, I was looking for the $2 bottles. I would go in and George would say, all right, Dottie, where'd you find this one?
Before Mike and Barbara owned the deli, which a lot of people remember the Llewellyns, it was Ayers General Store. And in those days, we used to be able to take Coke bottles over there and get a refund on them because they were glass.
He had cats, and the cats used to lay on top of all the pies or whatever. I mean, he always had these bakery pies that were brought in, and all the kids liked them, and there'd be cat hair all over everything.
One of the last good stores in Island Heights was Vierik's Ice Cream Parlor, and they made homemade ice cream right there at the plant, and it was terrific for a nickel. You could eat as much ice cream as you could eat.
Vierik's Ice Cream, which was owned by Mr. Siddons, Dave Siddons' father. And we would go there to get ice cream, and it would be fresh dipped, and it was the richest, most wonderful ice cream, and it was always wrapped in newspaper.
When more cars became available, especially after World War II, when the gas rationing was over, it changed the whole economy of town. The stores just slowly folded in Island Heights, and they all basically closed.
During the Depression, to help people have at least some kind of food, they would deliver stuff like bags of cornmeal that you could make biscuits out of and everything, butter. That was one of the luxuries, but you did get butter, beans, nutritious stuff.
Prior to 1929, when we had the big economic crash, people's mortgages were structured in a different way. They were due on demand. You had no recourse. If the bank wanted its money, you had to come up with it. And then during the 1929 crash, people didn't have the money, and some of the banks demanded payment, and the people lost their houses. So there were a number of houses in town that were empty.
We had one meal a day. And I can remember it got really bad. And Mom had potatoes. Aunt Peg, she had a can of something I don't remember now. And we had chickens, so we had eggs. So between Aunt Peg and Mom getting the food together, we had supper all together.
It seemed that in the very bad economic times, we also had very, very freezing winters. It was a little hard to manage sometimes because heat would be a problem. People would only heat some rooms in their houses to save money.
And my dad told me, he said, you come home every night with your feet almost frostbitten. I said, yeah, but we're having fun. Yeah, he says, you're freezing to death all at the same time. So he went out in the yard and he got 2 bricks and put them in the oven of the big wood stove. So when I came home and got ready for bed, I'd wrap a towel around those bricks, put them at the foot, inside the blankets, the foot of my bed, kept my feet warm.
The cadets, I remember them always. And my memory goes back to about 1932. So I would say they probably started in the late 20s.
They would march like a parade from the train station down there. Then they'd have drills late in the afternoon.
I remember my dad telling me the story of they used to, when he was a kid, they used to watch the cadets come from the train station and they would march to the Wanamaker complex. And they would always, I guess they would kind of make fun of them and rib them and stuff, you know, because they were all in uniform and everything.
At that time, on the roadside, there was a double row of trees so that there were shade for the spectators. And we would go up and my grandfather would carry a chair for my grandmother. My mother and father didn't go. And they would take me as a little girl and we would go and watch the, oh yes.
And then Sunday evenings, they had church. And they were benches underneath the trees. And we all went down there and sat and had the service.
John Wanamaker realized that his employees didn't have money enough to take a vacation. So he started this camp where all employees were eligible to come down and have a 2-week vacation, which was long and generous, and it was free. In exchange, they had to participate in a marching band where they carried wooden guns and wore heavy uniforms and practiced in the attic of the store all winter. So they were very proficient. They were good musicians and good marchers.
The girls would come for 2 weeks and then the boys would come for 2 weeks. And they were taught to swim. That was the first thing. They were taught to row. They were taught to sail. There was an article once written by somebody in Island Heights that Wanamaker had made slaves out of them or something like that. Well, when we would buy something in Wanamaker's and charge and send it to Island Heights, so many times the sales girl was like, oh, Island Heights. They were the best 2 years of my life. But see, these people lived in row houses. The Depression was on. So they got down here and they had a wonderful time swimming. And all they were asked to do was to learn how to drill.
John Frederick Peto is one of the greatest still life painters in the world.
Peto was a mystery. He was haunted by some things that we still don't know. I believe that he tried to tell his story through his paintings.
The Petos were very strong Methodists. The Methodists had a camp meeting association where Island Heights is now. Not all of it, but most of Island Heights. They came down to Island Heights for the camp meeting. John Peto, my great-grandfather, he played the cornet in the band that they had. In 1889, he built his house with his father's help. I believe, they don't ever mention who paid for it.
Peto came down to Island Heights and stayed with his aunts, who had one of the cottages up at the camp meeting grounds. He would come and play the cornet for the Methodist camp meeting grounds. And over time, after he built this house, he ended up moving one of the cottages from the camp meeting grounds to the property here at the Peto Museum.
Island Heights was only 11 years old. There still were not that many year-round houses. There were some people who used homes here as summer retreats. It is possible that Peto did move down here because it was a Methodist community. I can't speak to his own religious background, but I think I can say definitively that there's no Christian imagery in his paintings. He came down to a place that was pretty much marsh, with some beautiful stately homes on the riverfront that were unoccupied most of the year, a hotel waiting for business. Okay, Tom's River, which I'm sorry was never a hub of intellectual civilization, sorry Tom's River, but he came to a place where he wasn't going to make a success, even as a Methodist.
The extraordinary thing about John Frederick Peto and his great still lifes are that they were painted in Island Heights. And Peto being one of the most important still life painters ever of the world, and he's from Island Heights, New Jersey. I mean, who would have thought?
Peto's work is all over the world. Princeton Art Museum has pieces, Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And a friend tells me that she was in Spain and she's seen a banner going across the street about this artist from Island Heights, New Jersey.
At the Brooklyn Museum, at the College Museum of Art in Williamstown, Massachusetts, they're at the Metropolitan Museum, they're at the High Museum in Atlanta, they're at the Museum of Modern Art. I mean, every major museum in America and abroad as well is trying to get a Peto. I mean, they are so much in demand at this point. And rumor has it that here in Island Heights, there are people that still have Petos, but they keep them out of the public view, and they, some of them are kept in storage, which is where they should be. The rumor is that there are several people that have them under beds. I'm not from Island Heights, even though I live here now, but it's a very eccentric community, and all kinds of things are possible. In fact, that's probably why Peto was so successful, because he was not in Philadelphia. He was not under pressure from other people. He could begin to explore his own sensibility, and I think that's an extraordinary thing.
A lot of people from Island Heights found work at Lakehurst, and I imagine that Lakehurst will always be famous for the one very tragic event that happened there, which was the crash of the Hindenburg in May 1937.
Well, that was a big thing when the Hindenburg came over. Everybody was standing out waiting for it for hours just to see it go over.
Before we even left here, it flew over here and around. And of course, they went around New York, and they were coming into land.
I was 9, and the Hindenburg had circled the town all day. We could see it. It was long and thin and silver, and there was a swastika on it, which my parents reacted to, and they said, oh, you know, it's terrible, it was a swastika. It meant nothing to me.
Quite a few Island Heights boys were there to catch, because they got paid to catch the lines.
When the Hindenburg blew up as it was coming into the mist, I was there.
We heard a great big boom, and we thought it was thunder, and it was really the explosion.
I never saw guys run so fast. It made no difference which direction you ran in. That doggone thing kept swinging.
two of them that I knew very well said, I never ran so long and so hard in my life, because no matter when I look up, I'm under the dirigible, and I kept running and running and running, and so it wouldn't fall on me.
And Harry Schlissman and Jack LaFleur had climbed to the top of the water tower to get a better look at the landing, because they could see that distance across the Pinelands.
My dad was one of the guys that climbed to the top of the water tower with Harry Schlissman and Bart Applegate, and I think there was a few other guys. Those are the two that I remember.
They were so horrified. They wanted to tell everybody, but if they told everybody, then they'd also have to say that they had climbed on top of the water tower, which was forbidden.
Now, I became very friendly with a Dr. Raymond Taylor. He was coroner at that time. He was called out and he had a driver. So he gave his driver a piece of chalk and morphine. And he said to him, put an X on the head of anybody you give a shot of morphine, so I don't. But just give it. Just give everybody it, because they've got to be in agony.
My mom, when the Hindenburg caught on fire, exploded, she was called into Lakehurst, and she telegraphed from Lakehurst to Philadelphia, and then the people in Philadelphia telegraphed over to Germany. And so, yeah, she was up there all night. My father was there working with the fire company, because they were all called up, you know. So, yeah, it was quite a disaster.
Even to the day, I can still, if I think about it, I can still hear it.
In World War II, Island Heights sent, both the town and the yacht club sent several people off to war.
I was a Seabee and I was in the Marshall Islands when I was 18 years old. And the only thing I saw there was the B-29 bombers. We built the strips for them, and then after that got done, they moved us to an island called Ebi. I was only 18 years old. And I learned fast.
My two older brothers and Butch Haddon's father, Butch Haddon's uncle, Dick Power.
In World War II, as the spirit rose to defend our country and things were mobilized, then groups were formed, Red Cross bandage making. We all took courses in how to spot airplanes and manned the airplane watchtower at the high school. Lots of drives, bond drives.
They rationed shoes, gas, of course. You only got enough gas to get you to and from work.
There were things that you just couldn't get. I mean, like Lucky Strike cigarettes were green. Well, Lucky Strike Green went to war.
And the reason that the sliding boards weren't there after the war is because they were taken down. They were metal and donated to the war effort.
When the war came on, John Wanamaker, I don't know whether he donated it, I rather imagine, or just loaned it to the Army, and that became an Army camp.
The camp stopped and the Army just appeared with trucks and jeeps and men in khaki uniforms, and they constructed tents and little houses. They were very secretive about what their mission was.
I know a couple of my cousins, third or fourth cousins, married 2 soldiers from there. Yeah, yeah.
At night when the camp was here, they were guarding the bridge and the beach. And we'd hear the trucks going over, taking the fellas and hitting those planks, plankety plunk, you know. I'd say, well, there they go.
The street lights that were along the boardwalk, they were blacked out 3/4 of the way around. And that was all. So it was very dark. The dirigibles or blimps constantly were going up and down the river.
My uncle, he's dead now, he had a fish boat, took people out, and he'd go way out to sea. And I don't know how many times he came home and told us. He says, a German sub came up, and he thought it was a whale. And they were talking back and forth, because they could speak English pretty good. And he could understand them. And they just passed the time of day.
I love the fire company. I think everybody did. It was such an important part of Island Heights, not only to offer us protection, but because they were so conscious of the community and did so much. They provided a lot of entertainment for the children and prizes and rewards.
The fire company, when we were young, that was the center of a lot of entertainment. Things revolved around, really around the fire company and the church.
Our community really ran on 3 things: the church, the school, and the firehouse.
Well, the fire department was always made up of residents from town, men from town, ladies from town.
Dad was in it 53 years, and I've been in the auxiliary 71.
My grandfather was, I think, one of the original firemen in the town. And my father was involved with the first aid squad. He was a charter member of that, and my mother taught first aid for a long, long time.
My great-grandfather was one of the founders, but my dad and my grandfather all served, all of my uncles, all of my cousins.
The firemen themselves actually built the new firehouse on weekends. All volunteer time. That just doesn't happen today. It's been there ever since. And the fire company's always supported town and been self-funded, basically. The town gives them a little help, but basically they sponsor themselves.
Volunteerism and community service has been a big part of our life always, and I am very proud that it is continuing with my children.
The house on the northwest corner of James and Ocean burned down, and the firemen felt so sorry for the widow, Mrs. Ellis, that they built her a house.
The Ellis family didn't have any homeowners insurance, so no fire insurance. So when the house burnt down, they really were left homeless. And people in town let them stay in their homes for a period of time. And then the firemen built the house with donated materials and all of their time. My dad did the electrical and some of the plumbing.
The fire company is one of the biggest assets this town has, that they do so much. And they're here and they come quickly when you need them. The races that they now have on Labor Day started on the 4th of July in front of the public dock.
Labor Day celebration, we look forward to that because that was a big thing. And they had all the races down there, had the street blocked off. Also, they had swimming races.
When I was small, they were at the pavilion at the end of Central Avenue on the asphalt. And I can remember they had the rooster calls and they had the mostly same stuff they have now, but it was just weird that it was on asphalt, you know.
They were very painful.
There's always an ambulance there from the first aid squad because when you ran there and you fell down, you were falling down on a nasty corrugated road, right? And you were full of blood and scratches.
I can remember being in the three-legged race with Shirley one time, and we both fell down and really skinned our knees good.
Yeah, it never occurred to us to practice the three-legged race before the day we actually had to run in it. And there were a lot of falls then because that takes a lot of coordination.
The Labor Day races were sponsored by the fire company. They just celebrated their 100th year of Labor Day races a couple years ago. I competed in the rooster calling contest that I won when I was 8 years old.
Do some of that. Do some of the rooster.
I'm not going to do the rooster crowing contest. I may even beat my wife. She was competing the same time.
I was the rooster crowing contest winner. I was very good at it, supposedly. So that was my only claim to fame on my races.
Can you hear a little bit now?
No, we can't hear a rooster now.
I always win the potato races. For first place in the three-legged race, I got 2 golden coins.
That's great.
The prizes that the fire company awarded were very carefully chosen. There were all kinds of sports equipment. They would buy things like baseballs, basketballs, footballs, tennis rackets. And then when I won the potato race, the only race I ever won in my life, I got a box of Whitman's chocolates, which was very unusual, but I loved them.
I think the biggest thing, the only things I really remember are the Snippy scissors and for the prizes and silver dollars.
When I was a child in the 40s and the 50s, we were given the silver dollars for winning so I don't know who started it or when it did. Every year, my husband Bob would go to call the local banks to be able to gather at least $200 worth of silver dollars. And these would be presented at the Labor Day races.
I'm not sure when the peanut scramble started, but I've been shoveling them off there for a good 20 or 15 years. I think we get last year about 700 pounds of peanuts.
Do people pay you off to throw peanuts at them? Do they give you a couple bucks?
No.
Is there somebody that you aim for specifically?
Well,
Every year?
I'll say yes.
I remember when my wife, who was from Hoboken in North Jersey, first came to Island Heights. And she saw everybody in town, from the mayor to everybody she knew, adults and children, everybody, going after the peanuts like they were gold doubloons. She couldn't help but laugh.
Well, there were townies and yachties.
I don't know how it started.
Come September, everybody would go home. We'd say, they gave us the town back.
Slowly, there became this feeling. And it was a shame because it had been so great. And then all of a sudden you've got the yuppies and the something.
Townies and the yachties.
Yeah, and that was a shame. That was a shame, and I don't know how that started or who started it.
Now, I was a townie. My brother Dick was a townie. My brother George was a yachtie.
There was kind of a little bit of a controversy there between the townies and the yachties, and usually the townies were probably not as well off, and the yachties would come from the city and they were probably a little more affluent. And there was always a little bit of friction there.
That's why really, like the people that came down that had summer homes, they had money, because if they had two houses, they had money. So they're the ones that, were in the yacht club that had the boats and things.
In the summertime, this town jumped because you had the summer people come in, open up their homes for the summer, and they'd bring their big boats in, and and of course the yacht club and all the people there.
The yacht club does a hell of a job with kids. I think it's wonderful. I love to see them little buggers out there with them little sails,
My mother's family, I guess, would have been called clam diggers by the Philadelphia crowd, and my father would have been called a shoe bee by the local crowd. So I guess my dad was a shoe bee and my mother was a clam digger.
I tell you the truth, I'd like to go back to those days. People were different. Say like your neighbor here. If we heard that they were sick, we'd take food to them, help them out, stay with them. But today, I don't even know my neighbors down the street.
You know, everybody trusted everybody.
Everybody knew everybody, and you weren't afraid to let the kids go. We rode all over town. And
Island Heights has been, you know, my hometown. And in fact, when we were first married, we were stationed at Quantico. Bob was in the Marine Corps and went to Vietnam, and we came back. Then we moved to Maryland and came back and decided that because he traveled throughout the whole Northeast, that we could live anywhere. And I said, I'm not moving. This is where we're going to live. This is where we're going to raise our children.
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with now both parents usually work, so there's, you know, there's not as many people around to volunteer and to get involved in the town as there was back in the day. I remember going to the post office where you would know almost everybody, you know, and now it's a completely different story.
I still think that Island Heights is the place to live.
I have spent every summer of my life in Island Heights since 1927.
It's just that now all the kids that I went to school with, and we were all always together, they're all gone. And there's only, well, I guess maybe I'm the only one left.